For what shall it profit a person if he gains the whole world but loses his soul? This is a famous passage from the Gospel of Mark. It doesn't come from today's story in Mark, but it might as well have. You see a man choosing between gaining the whole world and his soul, and he finds that he's just not quite able to let go of the things he has held dear and join in to Jesus' promise of eternal life. The other story that was read today, the story of Stephen, shows exactly the opposite point. Someone who truly gets it. What profit is it to gain the world but lose your soul? Stephen is known in Christian tradition as the first martyr, the first one in those early days of the church after Jesus had left the earth, when they were still trying to figure out what it meant to follow him, to give his life for the sake of that call. And he really does get it. He does lose the world, right? He loses everything that was near to him and dear to him as the rocks come flying at his head. But he does it because he doesn't want to deny the story of Jesus' love on the cross and the resurrection. He loses the world, he gains his soul. In our sermon series called Church Alive, we've been looking at some of the characteristics that marked the early church in the book of Acts. Those first years after Jesus left the earth. And we also get a chance to see those characteristics as they're applied to our time, our place, our lives as followers of Christ. And today we come to the idea of sacrifice and what it is to give up what's comfortable for what's uncomfortable, what's known for what's unknown, what's good for what's better. Stephen gets it. Now, a little aside about him before we dig into what sacrifice means for us. At the beginning of chapter 7, the beginning of chapter 6, before the section that we have about Stephen getting into trouble with the authorities, we learn a little bit more about who he was. In the early days of the church, the apostles were busy with their preaching and their teaching, the big upfront guys, right? The ones that everybody saw. And they found that there were these administrative tasks and these serving tasks and these caring tasks that needed to be done. They didn't have time for both, so they delegated. They appointed some deacons to do some of those serving and administrative tasks. Stephen was one who was called to that quiet, behind the scenes, waiting on tables kind of work. You would never expect, would you? At least most of the time we don't expect, that it would be one of those quiet behind-the-scenes persons who makes such a huge impact for Christ, whose name we know 2,000 years later. But if you think that the only ones who make a difference for Christ in the world are the big upfront preacher types, you are dead wrong. Stephen proves it with his life. Every time you do work behind the scenes, you are doing something that is so valuable that it is every bit, if not more valuable, than those who do work up front. Anyway, that's my aside. Stephen, the guy behind the scenes, gets to live his life out loud for Jesus and give his life out loud. What about us? What shall it profit a person if she gains the whole world and forfeits her soul? Are we able to do the same kind of thing that Stephen did? I think sometimes when that question is asked, what does it profit us to gain the world and lose our soul? We answer, well, it profits us quite a bit. The whole world's pretty good. We like the things that we can have in this world, and they're not all bad things. 43% of Americans, that's almost half of us, 43% of American households spend more than they make. Our eyes are bigger than our pocketbooks. We buy into this idea that if we can just have certain things, really we will be happy. We spend so much of our time trying to gain the world, not thinking so much about our soul. And a life of sacrifice is a life of thinking about giving up and letting go of some of those things we think we need to be happy. Again, giving up what's comfortable for what's not. Giving up what we know for what we don't know. And it's a gamble every time. And though on the one hand, we, aren't very good at sacrificing, maybe. We think we can't do what Stephen did. On the other hand, we practice sacrifice all the time. Your alarm goes off in the morning and you don't want to get up, but you do it anyway. Because either maybe you have children to care for, or maybe you have a job to attend to, or maybe you promised a friend you'd bake cookies for that funeral supper, or maybe you said you would be somewhere to help someone else out. You have things that the world is calling you to, and so you turn off the alarm and you push back the covers and you get up. A small sacrifice, but we make them every day. And again, every time we make a sacrifice, it's a gamble because we're giving up something good for the hope of something better, but we never know what it will be like if we choose the thing that we're letting go of. Sacrifice bunt in baseball, for example, is a hope. You hope that when you bunt the ball, the runner will advance, but you don't know. The infielders on the other team might be better than you think they are. They might be able to get out both you and that runner headed to second. Anyone who's ever been in a relationship, you've had a boyfriend or a girlfriend or a best friend, or if you've been married, you know a little something about what it's like to give up something good for the hope of something better. You give up your independence, at least some of it, for the opportunity to be in relationship, for community, for security, for comradeship. And you take your best guess looking at the odds and you hope that it works out. But not every relationship does. If you've ever taken on a new job or tried a new activity, you know what this is like too. You give up some of your free time so that you can maybe make a little money or that you can learn how to be better at some sport. And you hope that it's worth it, but you don't know. Sacrifice is always a gamble. And it's sometimes a gamble with some pretty high stakes. You and I have a lot more than just two choices to be in a relationship or not to be. In our world, we are faced with hundreds of choices every day, hundreds of different things that we could make sacrifices for. And every time we choose one, every time we say yes to one, we're saying no to a whole host of others. Take your average Friday night. Last Friday night, 2 nights ago. How did you spend it? Maybe you spent it with family or friends, deepening those relationships that you hope will last a lifetime. Or maybe you spent it engaged in the community, trying to make a difference, doing some act of service, or patronizing the arts, or being in a political rally, doing something that you thought would make the world a better place. Or maybe you spent it doing homework, or getting some extra work done so that you could advance at work. Thinking, well, if I sacrifice some of these other things, then it will benefit me in the future. All of these are good choices. How do we know which ones to do, which sacrifices to make? After all, if you're a young person, those decisions that you make are going to have some effect on your future. Doing your homework versus being with friends could affect your grades, the college you get into, your career choice. On the other hand, if you spend all your time with your nose in a book, it could affect your social skills down the road. If you're an older person, every decision that you make, every choice you make, is being watched by those younger than you. They're learning what sacrifices to make and how to make choices by watching you. So these are high stakes that I'm talking about. As we live our lives and seek to make sacrifices, they may not be on the grand scale that Stephen made his, but we have to make choices. How do we know? I recently attended a conference in which the speaker talked a little bit about this. His name is David Lowe's. He's a preacher, and he's a teacher in Minnesota. And he talks about the fact that when we make choices, most of the time, we're making them based on a story we tell about ourselves, a story we want to be part of. He talks about a taste test. 9 out of 10 people doing a blind taste test of varieties of cola will pick RC Cola as the tastiest of the choices, over Coke, over Pepsi. Again, this is a blind taste test, just little cups, no labels. RC Cola, best tasting cola in America. But it's certainly not the best selling. Why is it that when we go to the store, we don't buy RC Cola by the busload? Well, it's because nobody wants to be an RC Cola person. You're a Coke person, or you're a Pepsi person. There are stories that these brand names tell that you want to be part of. Ultimately, even if we tell ourselves we're buying based on taste, we're buying based on the story. That's what marketing is all about. And if it's true in those little ways, it's true in the big ways too. When it comes to Friday night, the choices that you make, the sacrifices that you choose, say something about the story you're telling about yourself. Maybe you're telling yourself that you are the family person. At the 9:30 I said family guy, which is not what I meant, not the TV show. Maybe you're telling yourself you're a family person. The choices that you make are because you want to do what's best for nieces or nephews or children or grandparents or parents or some people that you love dearly. Or maybe you tell yourselves you're one of those who wants to make a difference in the world, and you're willing to move far away, to sacrifice some of those family relationships so that you can engage in politics or engage in peace work overseas or do any host of things like that. The choices that we make tell a story about who we are. My grandmother was one of those who saw herself, the story she told about herself was the Superman, the Superwoman. She wanted to make a difference. My grandmother won an award in 1992, Indiana Mother of the Year. Pretty big deal. But that award was not given to her because she baked the most chocolate chip cookies of anyone in the state, or because she bandaged the most scraped knees, although she did raise 9 kids, so she probably bandaged a few. It was given to her because of the way she participated in the community working to help children. She was active in all kinds of school boards in the area. She was active in trying to get a better library for our community. She was active in getting a new museum in our community. She did local and statewide politics. She was always busy, always, to the day she died, constantly moving, constantly energized around new ideas to change the world. When my grandmother received this award, there were some people who were very proud of her. Chances are those people also told stories about themselves that connected with that make a difference in the world idea. But there were also some people who were a little bothered because they knew that in order to get this award, my grandmother had made some sacrifices around the time spent with her family. Those are probably the people who told the story about being a family man or a family woman. All of us make sacrifices based on the stories we tell ourselves, the stories we want to be part of. But you know, whatever story it is you're telling yourself, whether it's the family man-woman story or the save the world story or some other story, the athlete story, the career person story, the most popular person in the world, the person with the nicest lawn story, whatever story you're telling about yourself is really all shades of the same story. A story about gaining the world. A story about getting it right. A story about not messing up. A story with high stakes because if you make the wrong choices, it could all fall apart. Stephen, too, made his sacrifice based on a story. But it wasn't any of those stories that I've been talking about. And it was a story that didn't make sense to the people who put him to death. They put him to death because they believed in stories too, of having duty to your faith and your traditions. And he was just going against all of those. Acts chapter 7, if you have a chance to read it in its entirety when you go home today. If you need a Bible, you can get one on the way out. Acts chapter 7 is mostly Stephen talking, telling these religious leaders the story that he believes they're part of versus the story he wants to be part of. He talks about God interacting with the people of Israel over the years and how the people again and again rejected God, thinking they were doing the right thing, but rejecting God. I don't want to be part of that, says Stephen. I don't care what you do to me. I don't care what you think of me. I want to be part of God's story. Well, what in the world is that? And how is it different from all these other stories, which are pretty good too? God's story goes a little something like this. There was a man named Jesus of Nazareth, and that man was also God. He lived on this earth, and he taught some great teachings, and he healed people of amazing things, And he forgave sins, which nobody was going around doing. And they killed him. But he didn't stay dead. He beat death. He was God, remember? And when he beat death, he also beat sin and anger, pain and sadness, all of the things that keep us from God and all the things that motivate us toward always getting it right and fitting in with these other stories. He came to conquer death and beat these other stories. God's story says, look, it doesn't matter if you do a good job or a bad job at the family thing. It doesn't matter if you do a good job or a bad job at saving the world or in your career or as an athlete or in having that perfectly tended lawn. What matters is that you are loved, you are forgiven. Now go tell somebody else that same thing. That is the story that Stephen wanted to be part of and for which he was willing to sacrifice every other story in his life. Now, when you and I say yes to that story, which isn't just a one-time thing, but a daily thing that we have an opportunity to do again and again, when you and I say yes to that story, we are going to end up a little like Stephen some days. We're going to get some rocks in the head. Sometimes people are not going to like us very much. Sometimes all those other stories will fall apart. Sometimes we may lose some opportunities to advance at work because instead of working overtime on the weekends, maybe we're serving at Cherry Street Mission. Or maybe we lose some friends because we're giving a little bit more of our money away. And so we don't have quite as much as our friends do, and so we can't buy the things they do and take the vacations that they take, and we can't keep up with our set. I guarantee, when you say yes to this story, you're loved, you're beloved, now tell somebody else, you will not fit in every day. Most days you won't. And there'll be days when you look at the balance, the ledger of your life, and you say, well, I don't know. Gain the world, lose my soul. I'm not sure. Maybe I want to lose my soul. I'm not sure this Jesus thing is worth it. There will be days like that. When I was 18, I had a chance to go to Mexico on a mission trip. And we were in one of those very rural areas where people have absolutely nothing. You know, they're building houses out of sticks and aluminum. And there's no running water, there's no plumbing, there's no electricity. We built a church in that town, 4 walls and a roof and a wooden floor. I think there were some folding chairs we put in. And of course it didn't have electricity either, and it didn't have running water either. And there was no heat or no air conditioning. There wasn't even glass in the windows. And it was still the nicest building in town. At the end of the week, 2 of the little girls that I'd been teaching in the Vacation Bible School that week came up to me and they gave me a box of stuff. There were some little stuffed animals in it, some little hair ribbons, and some pictures of themselves. Now I knew and was overwhelmed at the time by the fact that this was probably about the best stuff they had. If they had any other stuffed animals, I didn't know about it. This could be all of their stuffed animals, all the pictures they had of themselves, and they wanted me to have it. I was overwhelmed. Today, thinking back on that story, I'm even more overwhelmed because I realized that they too were making a sacrifice to be part of a story. They were tired of sticks and aluminum. They wanted to be part of this American dream that this white girl from up north had brought in a whiff of one week. And they thought maybe if we give her what we've got, maybe a piece of us can go back. Maybe we can be part of that story too. I took a huge risk, a huge gamble. What was I going to do with that box? I ended up writing letters to them for years. I treasured that box. They didn't know what I would do with it. For all they knew, I would toss it in the first trash can I came to once I hit the border. On the days, and there are a lot of days, when I question whether this Jesus thing is worth it, and I think, well, maybe I want those other stories that I used to live for, maybe I want to gain the whole world and to heck with my soul. I remember those little girls in Mexico and their box of stuff. And I realized that all those other stories that I want to be part of, being the perfect family person, or the perfect career person, or the perfect whatever, are just a bunch of sticks and aluminum covered over to look really nice. I don't want any part of that. I don't want any part of the world that tells me that all I need to be happy is one more Diet Coke. I want a different story. I want to be part of the story that says I am loved and forgiven as I am. Now go tell somebody else. Lord Jesus, take my life as you took Stephen's. I'm ready to lose the world and gain my soul. Make me part of your story.